That night began with a familiar quiet. But underneath it, something was shifting, something I didn't fully understand yet. It started like any ordinary night, and still, I had no idea how much was about to change between us. Looking back now, it feels like every moment before had been leading to that one point, the night everything finally came to the surface. Daniel and I had always been close. Closer than most brothers. As twins, people assumed we were identical in every way, the same thoughts, the same habits, the same personalities. But we were not really. Daniel was the louder, bolder one, while I preferred to stay quiet and observe. We looked like mirror images, but on the inside, it felt like we were reflections distorted by different experiences. Our parents were out of town for the weekend. It was supposed to be a regular Friday night, just the two of us at home. But things rarely stayed regular when we had too much time alone with our own thoughts. The house felt emptier than usual. Maybe that's why the energy between us felt different. Like there was something waiting to be said, something we had avoided for too long. We spent most of the evening pretending to watch a movie. Pretending because I couldn't recall a single scene. My mind was elsewhere, stuck on everything we never talked about. And every time I glanced at Daniel, he seemed lost in the same quiet storm. Whenever our eyes met, he'd give a small, crooked smile, the kind that made it hard not to wonder what he wasn't saying. I'd look back at the screen, but the tension kept building, rising slowly like a wave before it finally breaks. Then out of nowhere, Daniel spoke. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" His voice was low, uncertain, nothing like his usual confidence. He wasn't the type to ask questions like that. Daniel didn't do what-ifs. But something in his tone made me pause. "Different how?" I asked, not sure where he was going with it. He shrugged, eyes fixed on the floor instead of me. "I don't know, just if things between us hadn't drifted the way they did." There it was, that unspoken tension, clearer than before. My heartbeat picked up, not out of fear, but because I knew this conversation was long overdue. Maybe I understood exactly what he meant. Maybe I'd been avoiding it. I tried to keep my voice steady. "What do you mean by that?" He didn't answer right away. He just stood, stretched, and mumbled something about getting a drink. I watched him walk out, a mix of confusion and anticipation twisting in my stomach. When he came back, he was holding 2 sodas. He set one beside me and sat back down, closer than before, but not in a strange way. More like someone finally ready to stop pretending everything was fine. Our knees almost touched, and for the first time in a long while, the space between us felt warm instead of distant. I took a sip, hoping it would calm me, but it didn't. Daniel broke the silence again. "We never talk about real stuff," he said quietly, "not the things that matter." I nodded because he was right. We had always been close, but we'd buried too many conversations. About growing up, about pressure, about how different we'd become without meaning to. "What stuff?" I asked, though deep down, I wasn't ready to face it. He gave a small laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Do you know what I mean?" I didn't respond. I couldn't, not yet. So I took another sip, hoping the moment would steady itself. But instead, it pulled every unspoken truth closer to the surface, where neither of us could ignore it any longer. Daniel turned fully toward me now, his eyes searching mine for something I wasn't sure I could give. "It doesn't have to feel strange, you know," he said quietly. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "What does?" He gestured between us, "This, whatever is going on with us." And there it was, the thing we had both been avoiding. Not anything odd or inappropriate, just the growing distance, the unspoken tension that had been building for months. Now it was out in the open, and there was no going back. A rush of emotions hit me all at once: frustration, confusion, relief. I didn't know how to respond, and maybe I didn't have to. Daniel simply gave that familiar lopsided grin and leaned back on the couch, as if saying the truth aloud had been enough for him. But that moment wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The night stretched on, the heaviness between us shifting but never fully settling. We talked more not about it, but about everything else. Old childhood memories, school stories, small things we hadn't thought about in years. It felt like we were circling something bigger, something overdue. But neither of us wanted to push too far. Eventually, I suggested we call it a night. It was late, and the emotional weight of the evening was starting to feel overwhelming. I thought maybe some sleep would make things feel normal again by morning. But as I headed toward my room, Daniel followed. "You mind if I crash in here tonight?" he asked casually, though something in his voice held more depth than he let on. We hadn't shared a room since we were kids, but I couldn't think of a reason to say no. "Yeah, sure," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. But nothing felt steady anymore. I told myself not to read into it. We'd shared rooms 100 times when we were younger. But this time felt different, not inappropriate, just heavier, like both of us were carrying things we weren't ready to admit. He dropped his things on the floor by the foot of my bed and flopped down beside me, hands folded behind his head as he stared at the ceiling. We didn't say much at first. We just lay there in the dark, the only sound the quiet rustle of the blankets whenever one of us shifted. Daniel lay close enough that I could feel the dip of the mattress, and suddenly I was overly aware of every movement he made. Not because anything was wrong, just because the bond between us had changed, stretched by time, pressure, and unspoken words. There had always been an easy comfort between us, a natural understanding. But now every breath, every silence, every thought felt heavier. I tried to think about anything else, but my mind kept drifting back to our earlier conversation. He hadn't said much, but the meaning behind it lingered, unresolved and impossible to ignore. Finally Daniel spoke, his voice cutting through the thick quiet. "Do you remember when we were kids, and we'd stay up all night talking about the dumbest stuff?" His tone had softened, carrying a mix of nostalgia and longing, like he was reaching for a version of us we had lost. "It feels like we haven't done that in forever." I smiled in the dark, even though he couldn't see it. "Yeah, I remember. We'd stay up until Mom or Dad yelled at us to sleep, and even then we'd whisper until one of us knocked out." Daniel chuckled, the sound low and comforting. "I miss that," he said, and there was something wistful in his voice, something that tugged at me more than I expected. It wasn't just nostalgia. There was an undercurrent of something deeper, old memories, old wounds, and it made my chest tighten. "Why do you think we stopped?" he asked after a long pause, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't have an answer. Somewhere along the way, life got in the way. School friends, growing up. We stopped being kids who could stay up all night without a care in the world. Over time we drifted, forming our own identities, our own separate lives. And maybe, just maybe, we had both felt this distance long before we ever dared to mention it. "I don't know," I finally said. "I guess we just got busy, life happened." He didn't respond right away, and I wondered if he was thinking the same things I was, how easy it was to let silence replace honesty, how much we had avoided the uncomfortable truths beneath the surface. Then he shifted a little closer, just enough that our arms brushed. It was a small, innocent movement, but it still startled me. It reminded me how unfamiliar closeness had become between us. My thoughts raced, memories, questions, regrets, feelings I wasn't ready to sort through. "Do you ever wonder what things would be like if they'd been different?" he asked quietly, voice unsure, like he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. "Different how?" I asked. He hesitated, and I felt the weight of whatever he was trying to say settle heavily in the room. Like if we hadn't grown apart, if we'd stayed close, if we'd kept talking the way we used to. I turned my head to look at him, but he kept his gaze on the ceiling, unreadable in the dim light. There was something in his tone, uncertainty, vulnerability, that told me he wasn't just talking about the past. He was talking about everything we'd avoided. About the space that had formed between us without either of us noticing. "Daniel, what are you trying to say?" I whispered. He finally turned his head to meet my eyes. For a moment, neither of us spoke. There was something sincere in his gaze, something raw and honest, that made it hard to look away. "I don't know," he said at last, voice soft. "I guess I just miss how things used to be." His words hung in the air between us, heavy with a meaning I couldn't fully name. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the tension that had been building all night, but no words came. Instead, we lay there in silence. The distance between us felt both wide and painfully close. Minutes ticked by, and I kept drifting into thoughts I didn't want to deal with, memories I missed, questions I didn't know how to answer. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us, something that couldn't be undone. Eventually, I closed my eyes, hoping sleep would pull me away from the confusion swirling through my mind. But it didn't. I remained hyper-aware of the slow breaths beside me, the quiet shifts of the mattress, the small brush of his arm against mine, simple, harmless things that suddenly felt weighted with everything unspoken. After what felt like an eternity, Daniel shifted again, turning onto his side to face me. I could feel his eyes on me, even with mine closed. The weight of his gaze made my heart pound. "You're not asleep, are you?" he asked softly. I opened my eyes and turned toward him. "No." He smiled, a small, familiar grin I'd seen 1,000 times, but this time it carried something gentler, something honest. "Yes," he murmured, "me neither." There was something in his expression, a mix of uncertainty and hope, that made my chest tighten. The air between us felt heavy with words neither of us knew how to say. I didn't know what to do with that. Didn't know how to respond to the intensity of the moment. So I did what I always did when I didn't know how I felt. I redirected. "We should probably get some sleep," I said, keeping my voice steady even though my thoughts were anything but. Daniel didn't move. He didn't look away. "Yeah," he said quietly, "we should." But neither of us closed our eyes. Neither of us rolled over. Neither of us ended the moment. We just stayed there, side by side, the silence deepening with every passing second. And that's when I finally understood something. It wasn't just me feeling it. Daniel felt it too, the tension, the distance, the unspoken truth that we had drifted far apart, and neither of us knew how to bridge the gap. It wasn't just in my head. There was more between us than either of us had admitted, and the truth of it scared me. Not something forbidden, just the realization that the distance between us had grown so wide that it had become its own kind of pain. But buried under that fear was something else too, a strange, almost overwhelming relief. A sense that maybe we were finally addressing what we had ignored for years. Eventually, Daniel broke the silence. "I don't want things to go back to normal," he said softly, barely above a whisper. "Do you?" I stared at him, heart pounding. I didn't know how to answer. I didn't even know what the right answer was. But I did know one thing with absolute certainty. Things weren't going back to the way they were. Not after tonight. And deep down, I didn't want them to. The night felt endless, stretched thin between moments that made my skin prickle, with a confusing mix of fear and anticipation. Not of him, but of the truth we were finally inching toward. As we lay there side by side, I could feel that something fundamental had shifted. His breathing was slow and steady, like he was trying to calm himself down. But beneath that steadiness was an undercurrent, an emotional charge that made the silence between us feel heavier than ever. It wasn't just quiet. It was filled with everything we hadn't said. Every unspoken thought. Every worry we'd both buried for years. The space between us felt smaller somehow, like the emotional distance we'd built was finally collapsing. He shifted slightly, his arm brushing mine. At first, I thought it was accidental, but then he did it again, deliberate this time. Not inappropriate, not romantic, just a gesture that said I'm here. A gesture we hadn't shared in years. His hand found mine under the covers, fingers hesitant before he closed them gently around my own. The touch wasn't charged with anything forbidden. It was simple, grounding, a bridge between our two worlds that had drifted too far apart. The moment felt fragile. Like we were standing on the edge of something important. His voice finally broke the quiet. "You want this?" he asked. not meaning anything romantic. But the moment itself, the reconnection, the truth-telling, the vulnerability. His fingers tightened slightly, seeking reassurance. I swallowed hard and nodded. That was all he needed. He turned fully toward me, eyes searching mine. In them I saw hesitation, fear, and something deeper. The realization that we'd both spent too long pretending we were fine when we were. His hand slid up my arm, slow and careful, like he was testing if it was still okay to reach for me the way he used to when we were kids, before life pulled us apart. A shiver ran through me, not from discomfort but from the unexpected warmth of familiarity. His hand reached my shoulder, steadying me, grounding me. And when he lifted my chin slightly so our eyes could meet, it wasn't romantic. It was a brother trying to read the truth on the face of someone he'd missed for far too long. In his gaze I saw everything. The fear of losing me, the hope of rebuilding us, and the weight of years spent avoiding the hard conversations. Then he leaned forward. Not to kiss me, but to rest his forehead against mine. A gesture we hadn't shared since we were little. A gesture of trust, of connection, of brotherhood, and I didn't pull away. I leaned into it. The closeness wasn't forbidden, it was healing. A breaking open of the wall we had built without realizing it. We stayed like that for a long moment, breathing the same quiet air. Nothing inappropriate. Just two people finally letting themselves feel the weight of what they had lost. Time blurred. The only thing that existed was the warmth between us, the shared grief, the unspoken relief. Eventually he pulled back slightly, and his breath was unsteady. You sure you're okay? He whispered. I nodded. Even without words, he could see the truth in my eyes. That was when everything shifted, not in a forbidden way, but in a deeply emotional one. He moved closer, his arms sliding across me in a protective, familiar gesture, the way he used to when storms scared me as a kid. Nothing romantic. Just brothers finally letting themselves be close again. For a long time, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence said it all. The regret, the relief, the promise that things would finally change. He was the first to move, shifting so he lay closer, his arm draped across my side in a quiet, protective way. Not inappropriate. Not suggestive. Just two brothers finally beginning to repair something they had lost along the way. It's complicated, I whispered. Daniel let out a quiet breath, like he'd been holding it all night. I know, he said, but complicated doesn't mean wrong. His words settled somewhere deep inside me, warm and steady. For the first time since waking up, the knot in my chest loosened just a little. He shifted closer, not touching me fully, but close enough that I could feel the heat of him. A gentle reminder of everything that had happened, and everything that still hung between us. We don't have to figure it all out right now, he said softly. Not today, not in one morning. I looked at him, really looked at him. His tired eyes, the small crease in his brow, the uncertainty hidden underneath the calm he always tried to carry. He wasn't pretending, he wasn't hiding. He was just being Daniel. The same Daniel who had always been there, and the same Daniel who had just changed everything. What do we do then? I asked, my voice barely more than a breath. His lips curved into a small, honest smile, gentle, hopeful, almost boyish. We start with this, he said. We stop pretending, we talk, we take it one step at a time, together. The word together hit me harder than I expected. I nodded slowly, feeling something inside me settle, almost like relief. Yeah, I whispered, together. Daniel reached over and lightly rested his hand on mine, not pulling, not pushing, not asking for more, just being there. The simple touch sent a warmth through me that had nothing to do with last night and everything to do with what might come next. Outside, the morning had fully arrived, sun rising, traffic starting, the world moving on like nothing had changed. But everything had. Daniel squeezed my hand gently. We'll figure it out, he said with quiet certainty. And for the first time that morning, I believed him. I know, Daniel said, his hand resting lightly on mine, but we can figure it out together. There was something simple, honest in his words that eased the weight on my chest just a little. Maybe we didn't need all the answers right now. Maybe it was enough that we both understood each other, that we were willing to face things together. For a while we just lay there, letting the silence speak. The world outside seemed distant, muted, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were exactly where we were supposed to be. But the moment couldn't last forever. Eventually, we'd have to leave the room and face reality. Our parents would be home soon, and the weekend would end. This quiet bubble couldn't last, no matter how much I wished it could. I guess we'll have to take it one day at a time, I said softly. Daniel nodded, eyes steady on mine. One day at a time, he echoed. It wasn't a plan, exactly, but it was a start. A promise that we wouldn't go back to ignoring what had happened, that we'd confront it together. The rest of the day fell into a rhythm that felt both familiar and new. We joked, we talked, we moved around the house like nothing had changed. But everything had. Every glance carried understanding, every gesture carried the weight of the unspoken. We were closer now, more aware of each other than we'd been in years. By evening, a strange calm settled over me. The confusion and anxiety that had clouded my mind in the morning softened into something manageable. Daniel had made it clear we didn't need to solve everything at once. We could take our time, figure things out together. Then the sound of the car in the driveway made my stomach twist. Our parents were back. The real world was rushing in. "You ready?" Daniel asked, calm but serious. I nodded. What else can I do? We walked downstairs together, side by side, stepping back into the world outside our room. Our parents greeted us cheerfully, oblivious to the emotional shift that had taken place while they were away. It was strange, comforting, and unsettling all at once. For now, that was enough. The days that followed felt unusual, like we were living two parallel lives. By day, we acted as normal brothers, sharing routines, chatting with friends, laughing at small jokes. But at night, in the quiet of our room, everything changed. The tension, the unspoken truths, the need to reconnect, those came out. We could finally be honest, if only in small ways. We didn't have to explain ourselves. We didn't need anyone else's approval. We just existed in the quiet, in the space we shared, letting the bond between us rebuild naturally, day by day, moment by moment. It became our routine. By day, the world carried on. By night, we let ourselves exist fully in the closeness we had regained. Time slowed, the outside world faded, and for those hours, everything felt simple, real, and right.